This is a video tutorial guide on how to play Hazama. The depth of this guide is somewhere between beginner and intermediate, so it assumes you already know what his attacks look like and how his drives work, but don't actually know how they work in real gameplay. Thus, we won't go through every single attack or tool that he has and how it works, but instead, what he can do in specific situations and what tools you should be using should those situations come up. With that in mind, you may want to review Hazama's in-game tutorial and command list before watching this video. Hazama is a tricky character with versatile offensive and defensive tools. He has some of the best movement and range attacks in the game, paired with good anti-air and one of the deadliest reversals. He can use these tools to force an opponent to play at his pace and keep an opponent off his rhythm. He can be very unpredictable and can overturn games in an instant. In neutral situations, Hazama has great long-range attacks and movement, allowing him to control the pace of the match. He can use his abilities to keep an opponent out, or to quickly close in to attack. He also has good anti-air attacks, preventing most characters from closing in very easily. However, he suffers at mid-range, lacking useful mid-range attacks, so extra care should be taken when fighting opponents at this range. And at long range, Hazama's drive attack has a lot of block stun, and can attack from many different ways. Normal characters will have to go to great lengths to close the distance, putting themselves at risk to your counterattack. It is also very fast and nullifies projectiles, so even fellow ranged characters will have difficulty fighting him. But be careful, in ranged battles, whoever has the initiative is often the winner, so choose your options carefully and use his superior attack vectors to his advantage. Also note that the chain attack counts as both a projectile and a physical attack, so it has the weaknesses of both in terms of your opponent's countermeasures. Most characters will not sit idly by as you poke them forever with your drive attack, and will attempt to close the gap to mid-range, where Hazama is not nearly as effective. You can prevent this by utilizing Hazama's drive movement to get away, flying off in unpredictable directions to prevent your opponent's advance. Because the Ouroboros gauge refills whenever the drive attack touches an opponent, it can be very difficult for opponents to approach at all. But remember to keep an eye on your gauge though, as your options greatly decrease when you don't have any. Knowing this, you can use the 2C anti-air, or the B follow-up to Serpent's benediction, as they are very useful in punishing an opponent who is overly hasty in attacking you. Aside from when you land a hit on your opponent, approaching a neutral with Hazama can be a little tricky, as his normal movement is quite slow. His drive movement helps to make up for this, but a prepared opponent has a good defense option for every approach. Thus, it's important to prioritize safety over immediately reaching your opponent, otherwise you'll find yourself dead pretty quickly. There are a couple important things to know about safer drive approaches. First, the distance that you fly is very important in determining whether an option is safe or not. The farther you are, the more time your opponent will have to use a slow, safe anti-air, but the closer you are, the less time you will have to perform your own attack. A good mix of the two will allow you to approach more safely and make it harder for your opponent to deal with. Another good way to keep yourself safe is to change your momentum mid-flight, so you can use another chain or whiff an attack moment to stop your momentum. And last, block stun is also a factor in safety, so if you use a whiff chain, a short chain, or your chain is instant block, your opponent will have more time to counterattack. Above all, try to use every option available to you. There are a lot of unique ways to move around with Hazama, and the more unpredictable you are, the more trouble your opponent will have in trying to deal with your approach. Once you have made a successful approach, or have otherwise forced your opponent to block, you can shift to short-range combat and begin your offensive. Though it seems basic, Hazama's offensive plan is actually very complex because he has so many options and variations. His normal Blockstrings are a little weak, since most of his attacks have so much pushback and little range, but he has other tools to help make up for this. Once an opponent is wary of his basic mix-up, he can start doing more fancy things to get into an opponent's head. Hazama's basic Blockstrings involve using his normals to force an opponent to block, and then sneak in as many mix-up options as you can. From 2A, you can go into the low 2B or high 6A. From 5B, you can go into the low 2B, 6B, or 3C, or the high 6A. And from 2B, you can go into the low 3C, 6B, or the high 6A. As far as the rest of his normals are concerned, they're mostly filler attacks to keep your opponent blocking. They are valuable because they'll strike opponents attempting to hit you out of a slower mix-up, or an opponent who otherwise stops blocking. However, always be on guard for an invincible reversal. Another thing to take note of is that you can't combo off of 6A or 6B without at least 50 heat, so keep this in mind when choosing your mix-up options. From virtually any block attack, Hazama can special cancel to alter his attack patterns and gain additional mix-ups. Special canceling into 214D gives him the option to use the A or C follow-up to gain an additional high attack or low attack respectively. The high attack is especially nice because it's advantage on normal block, so it's good for an opponent who is scared to do anything but block. But note, both of these attacks are relatively slow, so your opponent will have time to counterattack if he is looking for your special cancel. In that regard, make sure to take advantage of the B and D follow-ups as well, as they can be useful in baiting out your opponent's counterattack. If you want to stay safe, special canceling into a Venom Sword will do that quite nicely. Hazama has many jump cancelable moves, and they present him additional options in Blockstrings. He can use the jump cancel like most other characters, using it to close in and attack with a combination of air attacks, and even double jump to keep his attacks ambiguous. He can also use it to instant air dash over the opponent for a cross-up attack, or he can use it in conjunction with his drive to gain other impressive movement attacks. Try to keep it as unpredictable as possible though, or you are liable to be hit by an anti-air attack. In a vacuum, Hazama is not very good at throwing the opponent because his throw range is short and his attacks have so much pushback, but he has many other ways to create throw opportunities. Remember, the basis of successful throwing is to throw when your opponent thinks that blocking or otherwise defending is the correct answer. With that in mind, it should be easy to see where a throw is possible with Hazama, as he often creates situations where attacking or jumping away from him can be very ambiguous, such as after a jump in or a 2A. Make sure to take advantage of the dash momentum when you can, as the extra movement during the dash will help you stay closer to your opponent. As far as choosing which throw to use, it really is just a matter of preference. The normal throw is faster and more rewarding if it lands, but is less reliable as it can be teched. The command throw is slower and cannot be teched, and even has invincibility, but often deals less damage when it lands, especially if you are looking to spend meter. Hazama is not very good at guard crushing, and this is because his attacks that remove primers are bad on block, so they immediately end his pressure, or even get him punished. This makes his ability to take away primers and continue attacking virtually nothing unless he has meter to rapid cancel, or if an opponent is not paying attention. But still, it's something to consider when choosing your mix-up options, as it will give your opponent more to think about, and may give you an unexpected bonus, even if your mix-up is blocked. Once your opponent is wary of your basic mix-up, you can shake things up a bit with little creativity. Most of these mix-ups are often too slow for an opponent watching out for them. But if they are too focused on stopping your basic mix-up, they won't be able to see it coming very easily. Take advantage of their mindset, and use these options to break the mold and really catch your opponent off guard. Try to come up with your own setups, and create mix-ups that suit your playstyle. Hazama's wake-up game is fairly strong. While his knockdowns don't grant him anything special like other characters or force an opponent to block, he has tools to limit the opponent's wake-up options, and is good at forcing an opponent to stay still after being knocked down. And even so, even if he fails to force an opponent to block, he can just shift back into his very powerful neutral game. First and foremost, the farther away your opponent is when they get hit by hungry coils, the longer they will be knocked down. If they are too low, you will not be able to combo or punish a roll, as your opponent will get up much faster. Regardless, if your combo ends in hungry coils for whatever reason, you'll have to guess which direction your opponent will roll, and choose an appropriate option to chase your opponent. And of course, if they choose the neutral roll, it cannot be punished. Note that when attempting roll punish, there is some risk involved as you may get punished for a really bad guess. If you want to take a more passive approach and settle for making an opponent block, dash, and then wait for your opponent to roll, and then choose an appropriate option. But remember, a block channel wake-up is no different from approaching to neutral and contains all the same risks. Serpent's Fang is a knockdown that is used in the majority of Hazama's combos. To maximize the time for where your opponent is knocked down, make sure that you are under, or as close to under as possible when you perform Serpent's Fang. This takes some getting used to, but is vital as it can mean the difference between a roll punish or a block super. For this knockdown, it is fairly standard to attack first with a 2A, as it will catch most quick wake-ups and forward rolls, but is still safe against neutral rolls or backward rolls. When your opponent is close enough to you such that he will roll past you on wake-up, there is a very powerful technique that will make him think twice about this. With good timing, input the super backwards using A plus B for the input. Make sure to hold back for a little longer to make sure that your barrier guard comes out instead of a 5B. If done correctly, when your opponent rolls past you, a Serpent's Infernal Rapture will come out, punishing his roll for big damage. If he does not roll past you, you will briefly perform a barrier guard, and then you can attack your opponent as normally. This maneuver has little risk when used and set up properly, and will limit your opponent's options without the guesswork. Though it may take a while, opponents will eventually get tired of being punished by your wake-up game, and will start using more safe wake-up options, such as blocking after a neutral roll. Once this habit sets in, you can take advantage of their hesitation by performing more risky mix-up options on their wake-up. Get creative and come up with stuff that will really catch your opponent off guard, but make sure to switch back to the solid wake-up style if you think your opponent will start being reckless again. On defense, Hazama is very limited and needs to rely on basic system defenses for the most part. That means jumping out of throws, instant blocking to create gaps, or using the barrier guard to push your opponents away. Be careful when using a defensive burst though, since it will put you at 2 primers. If your opponent is using a Blockstring with a big gap, you can use the B follow-up to Serpent's benediction to counterattack your opponent. This attack is completely invincible once the kick begins, so it's a reliable option for Blockstrings that are slow. However, it is completely vulnerable beforehand, as you need to complete the stance before you can perform any of the follow-ups. But still, it is a very reliable option on defense, and is even more effective against opponents who are using a mid-air attack. The deadliest part of Hazama's defense is that he has a very fast distortion drive that can deal massive damage on hit or trade. This attack is incredibly fast, and can come out in the smallest of gaps, making your opponent very nervous whenever he goes for a Blockstring, or even attacks you on wake-up. Note that when using this attack, your goal is to hit or trade with your opponent as he is about to perform his next attack. If you try to throw it out whenever, you may find yourself punished by a very well-prepared opponent. Also, there are many attacks that Serpent's Infernal Rapture does not trade well with, such as attacks that wall slam or stagger Hazama for a long time. Alright, that's it for the Hazama tutorial. Whether you're a hardcore Hazama player or a player looking to get the edge on Hazama, I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you're looking for help on combos, make sure to check out the in-game challenge mode or other online resources. Well, that's all I got for you, and until next time, make sure to keep on practicing.